Hey there, hi there, ho there, it's Wispopedia. Recently, I've made a solemn vow to only speak about aspects of games that I really like in my YouTube videos. I want to focus on the good side of things so I don't turn into an entitled gamer complaining about stuff all the time. But I'm gonna break that rule a little bit today. Because I've been thinking a lot about Monster Hunter Rise lately, and I just kinda keep getting sad about it. I don't want to beat around the bush, so I'm gonna tell you my biggest problem with this game. It's that there's basically no in-game content whatsoever. At least, not much compared to other Monster Hunter games. Now, we all know that this can be a problem in games for sure, but it is exacerbated in Rise because there are so many other things that feel so good in this game. I want to talk today about how Capcom hit the mark on many aspects of this game, and how it makes the lack of endgame content kind of feel even worse. Number 1. Combat flow. The movement of this game is so fluid. I really love how the game just feels to play. Having the Palamute, the Wirebug, and everything just makes hunts so much more fast-paced. I love being able to move around the map and get right into hunting monsters. This is also due in part to Capcom removing a lot of the cruft in these games. Like, I know people love the gathering of classic Monster Hunter, but I don't want to have to dig around for stones just to sharpen my weapon. The infinite whetstone itself was a huge quality of life improvement when World was released. I know people don't like it, but I do, so at me, I guess. The quality of life changes from World, to me, sped up the experience of the game and got rid of a few extraneous gameplay elements. Auto-crafting, gathering once for multiple items, being able to gather as you move, even mining once at an outcrop have sped up the game and helped to keep you moving towards the ultimate goal of getting a big weapon to fight a big dragon. And speaking of fighting big dragons, the fights themselves have become so much more fast-paced and action-focused. The hunter feels so much faster and easier to control. It feels a lot less clunky to play the game. Movement is more fluid, wire falling helps keep you in the action, and even being able to ride your Palamute to the area to fight the monster keeps you in the action for longer periods of time. It seems like Capcom wanted to move combat more towards a third-person action game. I've also heard from some of my friends that this gives the game more of a pick-up-and-play feel, where they'll do a few hunts while commuting or whatever, which is part of what made mobile Monster Hunter great. Honestly, the switch to switch has given Rise a much more accessible feeling. I love being able to do a few hunts and take a break, or to sit down, do a bunch of hunts with friends. The pacing of combat and the general handheld console feel of the Switch have allowed for an interesting approach to playing the game. On the note of the Switch, can we also just acknowledge what a feat Capcom pulled off in utilizing the hardware? The game looks good to me. It usually runs pretty smoothly, even with a lot of elements on screen. Above everything else, though, is the load times. They're insane! Quests load almost instantly. I really don't understand how Capcom made that happen on the Switch. The load times for Xbox One, PS4 for Monster Hunter World were so much slower, and the Switch isn't really the most powerful console. It's nuts. All told, playing the game feels great. It's fun, fast-paced, and focuses on the monster fights in a way that feels unique to Rise. Speaking of monster fights, here's another aspect of Rise that I love. 2. Redesigned fights. Okay, full disclosure, I was not excited to see the original Elder Dragon trio come back. I hadn't really fought Chameleos aside from a few attempts in GU, and I haven't really ever enjoyed fighting Kushala or Teostra. But man, these fights are so much better in Rise. Chameleos might even be one of my favorite fights in any Monster Hunter game now. It's such a varied fight, and its tells are easy to follow once you really start to learn the encounter. Once you understand how the monster operates, it's a lot of fun to fight. I love the mist it sprays, the poison it rains down, all of that. Awesome. Teostra is fun. This one I'm a little less enthusiastic about, mostly just because I've never been a huge fan of Teo anyway. But Kushala, though? This fight was my most hated in World, and it's completely turned around. Now that there are visual effects that actually make sense, that you can actually see, it's pretty fun to take Kushala on. The monster looks great, and is a lot easier to tell which areas you should avoid to evade its attacks. It's so much better. And then there's Valstrax. Friggin' Valstrax, man? Huh. This fight will always be one of my favorites, but it's just buck wild in this game. The ambush attack, the visual effects, they knocked this fight out of the entire park. It's so much fun. It's difficult, but it is so fun. The first time I took Valstrax on, my entire group was giddy and giggling the entire time. It was amazing, and Valstrax just looks great. All of the fights in the game were likely tweaked with wirebugs in mind. As such, the battles against nearly every monster have been dialed up to 11, even some mid-tier wyverns. Mizu, for example, has gained so much more speed and keeps you on your toes the entire time you're fighting it. It's awesome. I can't think of a single fight that hasn't been improved in this game. Every one of them feels refined. Sometimes, even just how the fights look have been so drastically improved thanks to the RE engine and its new effects. Speaking of looks, here's another thing this game absolutely nails. Aesthetic. It's the aesthetic. In Monster Hunter World, the biggest complaint the player base had were the weapons and the armors. In World, the gear was created with more realism in mind, and that left us with a lot of weapons and armors that looked a lot less fantastical and exciting than what most players have been used to in previous entries. Honestly, they looked pretty bad. The attack on weapons are some of my least favorite weapon designs across almost like any game ever. I was sad to see a few of them return, but I definitely understand the need to cut dev time in designing weapons for the monsters returning from World. But the rest of the weapon designs look fantastic. Magnamalo's weapons, for example, all evoke such a sinister and menacing feel. And there are some really great weapons and armors in this game. Gossarog's, also, just amazing. I really hope that this trend continues. Please, Capcom. More great armors and weapons would be awesome. And honestly, the gear is just the start. The new monsters all look great too. They certainly fit the yokai theme that Capcom was looking for in this game. The designs are fantastic, and many of the monsters introduced in Rise have become some of my favorite monster designs in Monster Hunter games overall. And just as a whole, the game is so well designed visually. Gamora is beautiful. The look of the village is perfect. Character designs are all visually appealing. It's great. Even the monster intros, my goodness, the monster and map intros are amazing! And even the maps themselves look so good too. There's just so much that looks good in this game. Although I will say, to some, the colors in the game do look a little washed out. That's certainly a valid criticism, especially compared to the more vibrant colors of classic Monster Hunter games. I think Capcom was trying to strike a balance between those two palettes, and the more realistic take of World. I'd say they're in a happy medium, though I would also prefer the more vibrant colors myself. But that said, I think Capcom really hit the mark when it comes to aesthetics. Everything looks pretty good, especially the monsters. Oh, and while we are talking about monsters, the roster in this game is pretty great for a base game. Monster roster. My biggest criticism of World, aside from the weapon designs, is that many of the monsters felt very samey. Sure, the issues with the Leviathan skeleton meant that many of our favorite long boys couldn't be in the game. But other than that, a lot of the monsters looked and felt pretty similar to fight. But in Rise has so many different monsters. Variety in the monster fights has been such a strength in this game. I mean, you start out fighting a trio of bird wyverns, and end up facing off against everything from a parasol bird to a sumo wrestling platypus to a bubble wyvern to a freaking rocket ship dragon. Like, there's a lot of different monsters in this game, and because each fight feels so unique, it makes the roster feel even more varied and unique. There are so many fan favorites in this game as well, it's great. The only criticism I could really levy is the variety of elder dragons. Story spoilers, real quick. Nara, Ibushi, Allmother Narwa, Teostra, Kushala, Chameleos, and Valstrax are the elders we get in this game, but I don't always really count the story elder dragons because you fight them like once or twice, you know? I'll talk more about Allmother in a minute, but I really felt like the elders were lacking a bit of variety in this game. This could be exacerbated by another issue, namely the unpleasantness of 2020. But I think Rise would have benefited a lot by having even one or two more elders in it. That would have just made the roster itself feel a little more complete and exciting, especially from an endgame perspective. Otherwise, the roster is really varied and exciting. It made learning each fight an interesting endeavor and makes each monster feel unique. There are so many great things about this game. So, what's the problem? There sort of isn't really an endgame. Okay, we have event quests every week. There are Capcom collab quests. We have the advanced quests, which unlock the new map. There are some advanced rampages, and we have the Apex monsters. But before we talk about those, I think we need to drop back for a second. One of the main draws for a Monster Hunter game for me is progression. I love making new armor, new weapons, and getting stronger throughout the game. In my opinion, Monster has some of the finest build crafting in games. Monster Hunter has some of the finest build crafting in games right now. And oftentimes, the endgame in Monster Hunter takes that idea and refines it even more. In previous games, we have earned other armor that has even more specific skills, or augmented weapons and armor to make them even more powerful. But in Rise, you fight Allmother Narwa, finish the story, and then you can fight Valstrax. And that's basically it. It helps too that the story wasn't finished until the final title update for Rise, and to be fair, those updates were free, but I know for me, I was hoping that Update 3.0 would also address endgame issues. Maybe something similar to Tempered Monsters, or Hyper Monsters, or Frenzied Monsters? Just something. Unfortunately, after you fight Valstrax, there isn't really anything left to do. Progression stops, and I know I personally lost a lot of motivation to play, which really, really stinks. Think about all the stuff I've been praising. None of that really matters if you don't continue to play the game. Now don't get me wrong, I know this is an entitled gamer rant which I'm trying to avoid here now, but I really want a reason to play Rise. I love so many aspects of this game, but after defeating Valstrax, I'm struggling to even find a reason to hop back into the event quests. The game is fun to play, and I know that is really what we play games for anyway, but Rise lacking a robust endgame is just such a miss for me. So, what's the solution? Now, I don't know anything. I'm not a dev. I know any and all ideas I have would be so much harder to implement than I think. And I do acknowledge that there were likely plans for things that had to be scrapped due to the unpleasantness of 2020. I know Capcom was impacted by that. However, some extra state of even more difficult high-rank monsters with ways to improve armor and weapons would be good. Utilizing that secret map more would be really interesting. I would love to see a huge boss fight that incorporates the last map that isn't just fighting 3 Apex monsters at the same time. I would love to see an online boss similar to Safi Jiva or Call of Taroth. Those fights were awesome. The gear was great. Something akin to those, a big boss that you need to take on with other people would be amazing. Or even just give the Apex monsters special weapons and armor. I'm begging. Please. Anyway, I love Rise. I want more of a reason to hop back into the game and play. The Capcom collabs are cool. The event quests are a good idea that could be handled better in my opinion. The Rampage quests were fun but could benefit from more variability and more special rewards. Ramp-up weapons are interesting but not as game-changing as they could be. Apex monsters are a fun challenge, but I will forever be sad until they get their own weapons and armor. If Capcom would even acknowledge whether or not they're updating the game anytime soon, that would be very cool. Maybe. Big maybe. We will see something at TGS this year. It would be really nice to get some Rise news. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Wispopedia, you can call me Wisp. Leave in the comments your favorite parts of Monster Hunter Rise. Also, let me just shout out the Dojo. Dojo is a Destiny clan and Discord server full of seriously wonderful people. We're building a beautiful, happy family there. There is a link in the description, so feel free to check it out. Do the usual YouTube things, like and sub, and catch me streaming here on YouTube. And I'll catch you next time.